Welcome back, everybody. So we've learned in a new court filing moments ago, after days of resistance, the director of the FBI sent over the names and the information of FBI employees investigating January 6 cases to the Department of Justice last night. However, both parties agreed to not publicly publish those names before the court has something to say about it. So what does this mean? We know who to ask. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joining us. Now, Jessica, why are we even having this conversation? It used to be that it was a given that we didn't release the names of people who protect and serve our nation. What's changed?
What's changed is we have a new administration that's changing a lot. I mean, you and I have talked about executive orders. We'll talk about those. And we have an administration who is changing the way we do business and is saying to the Department of Justice, ask for FBI agents to identify themselves if they worked on January 6th. We know one of the president's very first things that he did once he was sworn in again was to pardon everybody who had been convicted or pleaded guilty regarding the events of January 6th. And now he's seeking to find out which members of the FBI worked on that case. As you said very clearly, the parties have come to at least a temporary agreement, meaning don't disseminate the names of these FBI agents unless you either give 2 days and allow them to fight it, or you just want to wait until the next hearing in this case, because there will be more hearings in this case.
And we understand that this is only a temporary reprieve for those FBI agents who are worried that their names could get out and that they could be vulnerable to retaliation by those who, not only in this January 6th case, but in other cases they've been involved in prosecuting.
Well, that's right. And that's what the judge, I believe, will consider. So at this point, what we're doing is we're taking the temporary restraining order hearing off the table because the parties have come to a temporary agreement. Sometime next month, I believe in March, there will be a hearing on something called a preliminary injunction. And the same arguments will come up. And the arguments will be FBI agents saying, I fear for my safety. I fear for the safety of my family. And we'll essentially ask, what is the purpose behind allowing anything other than my employee identification ever to become public, in the sense of why would this information ever need to be disseminated to the public at large? There will be arguments, and then a judge will make a decision.
Be fascinating to watch that. Let's pivot now to this conversation regarding President Trump's executive orders on birthright citizenship. We've now seen 2 court rulings. Appeals are in process, but there's also a hearing going on in Boston. Tell us what you know about that.
So we know that it's basically the same arguments, and the arguments are, I'm going to characterize them as arguments to uphold the executive order on the basis of a new interpretation of the 14th Amendment. So we know that the executive order tries to essentially strip certain people of birthright citizenship. What is birthright citizenship? It comes to us from Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And I believe that a good reading of the plain language of the 14th Amendment tells us if you're born in this country, it does not matter what the status of your parents are. You are a citizen of this country. The Supreme Court for over 100 years has adopted that interpretation. And so what we read in these various court hearings are, I think, efforts to try and get this case to the Supreme Court and try to get the Supreme Court to adopt another interpretation, because right now, any lower court is bound by the Supreme Court's definitive interpretation of what the Constitution means. And at this point, again, case law indicates that this executive order, in my view, just cannot stand.
Well, play it out to the Supreme Court then, given all of that precedent. If the Supreme Court were to side with Trump's position on this, that would be earth-shaking.
It would be. That would be a completely different understanding of the 14th Amendment, again, put into the Constitution after the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, in part to say to people who are formerly slaves or the children of slaves, you're born in this country, you're a citizen, it does not matter what status your parents have. And so if the court were to go back and look at language in the 14th Amendment that talks about subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that you are born in this country and subject to this country's jurisdiction. If they were to reinterpret that to exclude people who have currently been included, that would be a huge change in the law and obviously would have deeply significant repercussions for people.
You speak of reinterpretation of constitutional language. What other ramifications could happen, Jessica? It will be definitely for the history books no matter what. So let's pivot and talk about USAID and attorneys and what they're moving relative to that. USAID is literally on fumes now, down from what, 10,000 staffers to 600 essential staffers. What's going on in the courts there?
So what's going on in the courts there are a couple of different things, but the main, as I see it, the main legal argument that people need to know is that there is a Clinton era statute from 1998, and it's a statute that helps us kind of define USAID and define its status. And it said to President Clinton, if you want to try and do away with USAID, go ahead, but you have 90 days. He said, I don't want to. And in the statute, there's nothing that prospectively would allow a future president to make significant changes. I believe that there's a good legal argument that what we're seeing right now, that essentially firing all of these workers, trying to put USAID under the State Department, that under this Clinton era statute we've been talking about would be viewed as a significant enough legal change that you would need Congress to bless it. And so those are, very briefly, I think, the biggest legal arguments when it comes to USAID, and essentially trying to, for lack of a better word, kind of disseminate it without talking to Congress about actually ending that particular agency.
Well, as our CBS News legal contributor, as an attorney, and as an educator, we know your students have no end of things to talk about these days. Jessica Levinson, good to talk to you, my friend. You have a good Friday.